It goes without saying that people prefer horror films that don't have CGI, because oftentimes the use of CGI can make or break a horror movie. But why is it so? Let's look at the logs from Final Destination 2. What many may not have noticed is that the infamous highway scene with the stack of wooden logs is CGI enhanced. Sure, it may not entirely be made with CGI, but there are elements used in it that enhance the overall output. They literally used post-production techniques to make the logs appear to bounce more realistically during the collision. Not sure how you make a scene appear more real than it actually is, but it is what it is, I guess. But many other movies have used elements that you simply can't deny were highly CGI intensive, unlike the log scene. Enter the Pale Man and Pan from Pan's Labyrinth. Okay, so my first question is, how do people think about these weird concepts of having eyes inside hands? Where does the inspiration for such creepy ideas come from? Guillermo del Toro's fantasy horror film may not be able to answer my question, but it does show how the idea is implemented into a story. And while we're at it, let's not forget that the two most iconic characters of the film are the Pale Man and Pan, both of which were brought to life using a set of practical and digital effects and enhancements. Now, many of you may have mistaken Pale Man's eyes for prosthetics, but that's definitely not the case here. In fact, this is one element that was completely made with CGI. Another bizarre feature of the characters was their legs, both sets of which were also highly dependent on CGI. To create the appearance of thin, gnarled fawn legs, the suit actors for these characters wore green screen sheets on their legs. This was then played with in post-production. So you're telling me those chicken legs aren't due to a lack of leg days at the gym? Cool, got it. And if complete dependence on CGI is your thing, you might like what we're getting into. Ever heard of Friday the 13th? Did you know that when the first movie came out, it received tons of backlash from angry fans due to several reasons? They probably didn't like the fact that the filmmakers tried to remake a classic. How dare they, right? But that backlash soon died down when the viewers realized that the movie could actually end up being in the greatest hits collection. Jason Voorhees was still very much present, although with a bit of a refreshed look. While this much was done, the true essence of the character remained intact. But having said all of that, many may have failed to pick up on one important detail, and that's that some of the weapons used in the movie were completely computer-generated. And speaking of weapons, it doesn't stop at Friday the 13th. Scream 4 follows a similar pattern. As with most older slasher films, the deaths in Scream and its sequels were primarily achieved through hands-on practical effects. But here's the interesting bit. All three films that came before this one used knives that were collapsible props. This was obviously done to ensure safety during filming. However, one genius named Wes Craven thought that it was time to switch it up and decided to introduce CGI for the fourth film. Not only the props were now replaced, but gore enhancements were also added via CGI. This meant that much like Friday the 13th's 2009 remake, this film was also the first in its line to take help of CGI. But the CGI doesn't stop at weapons. Entire swamps can be created with this technology, as we saw in the film The Skeleton Key, a Southern Gothic film that had Kate Hudson in it. The film focuses on a hospice worker who thinks her newest patient is under a dark curse. The film, which was shot on the Felicity Plantation in Louisiana, required the creation of a swamp on the property. This was particularly difficult because instead of a swamp, the property was surrounded by fields instead. But fret not, when you've got a crew that can dig trenches and pipe water into them. Yes, an actual swamp of sorts was made for the film. Obviously, they couldn't replicate an entire swamp naturally, so instead, CGI was used to enhance the swamp's appearance post-production. But not everyone's as lucky as these guys were with CGI. For example, did you see Mama's hair? No doubt that the film itself would give you the creeps, but it still lacked in the close-up shots of the main antagonist, Mama itself. The film came out in 2013 and starred Jessica Chastain and Nikolai Coster-Waldau. What sets the film apart is the unique story it carries. Imagine two foster kids having an imaginary friend, and then figuring out that the imaginary friend is actually real. Having goosebumps, aren't you? In addition to that, when the imaginary friend looks like what the monster did in this film, you're sure to turn into a ghost yourself. But here's the thing. Many may have thought that the entire character was made in CGI, given how it didn't look that great from some angles. But even that isn't true. Mama was entirely portrayed by an actual actor, and the only part that was created with CGI was Mama's hair. On the contrary, what do you think about completely CGI-built characters? That's what the sharks in The Shallows were. You know why I like this one so much? It nails one thing that many other shark movies completely fail to do: create a real creature. And that's mostly because they need to use intensive CGI for it. But The Shallows fellows may have found a workaround for that entire process. Reportedly, they used a combination of practical and digital enhancements to bring the great white shark to life. No wonder the viewers and critics alike had nothing but praise for it. Complete CGI may have worked here, but usually it's best to have a combination of the two, as demonstrated in The Hills Have Eyes. This was another remake that was much better, if not slightly better than the original. You're obviously aware of the oh-so-lovely mutant killers in the movie, but what you may not have figured out is how the deformed appearances took aid from both prosthetics as well as CGI. One thing to notice, though, is that the adult mutants were mostly using prosthetics, while the children's deformities were created mostly through digital manipulation. This also made sense given that they were partially deformed, unlike the adults. And while we're on the subject of children, let's give another one a go. Yeah, the baby from Dawn of the Dead. While Zack Snyder's 2004 remake may be known for many things, more so for the way he changed how zombies were usually portrayed in films. But for me, it was one specific actor, the baby. And given its fate in that scene, there's no wonder that it was created entirely with digital effects. But overall, good job, Snyder. Now that I think of it, how did he end up making superhero movies? And speaking of mistakes, let's talk about another one. Believe it or not, Michael Myers was completely messed up at one point. How, you ask? Well, how about shooting a scene with Michael Myers and the actor not wearing the infamous mask that's literally a part of the character's identity? Director Steve Miner instead approved the use of a digital mask. Why? I don't know. Did it receive criticism? Oh, for sure. Was it too noticeable? Well, it depends on how good of an eye you have. But the scene does end pretty quickly, so do I think it should have happened? Absolutely not. And with that, we've covered 10 CGI effects in horror movies. See you in the next video.
You learn a lot when you watch movies over and over.